Hey everyone! Once a month or so, we pick an episode to be free for everyone so that if you're not a paid subscriber, you can get a little taste of what life is like on the other side. A major part of that life is getting to hear the Ask Ann Anything segment. Today's is really juicy. It's a practical guide to spotting the difference between a PR move and something genuine when it comes to celebrity gossip. If you like what you hear, head over to culturestudypod.substack.com and become a paid subscriber. It's just $5 a month or $50 a year. And if you already subscribe to the Culture Study newsletter, you get a really big discount. If you don't subscribe to either, but you want both, sign up for the newsletter first, and you'll get a follow-up email with the discount for the podcast. Okay, thanks everyone. On to the show.
So we've been running Go Fug Yourself since 2004. So that predates Twitter, it predates Instagram, it definitely predates TikTok, it predates YouTube. So I would say when we started covering the site, celebrities were basically models, actors, musicians. That's basically it. And then you'd have sort of like what Heather and I would call like New York famous, which would be like Tinsley Mortimer, like some socialite stuff like that. People that, like maybe don't really break through to like the masses, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, who weren't necessarily in People, but they might have been in like the New York Post.
Exactly. Yeah, like you go to Fashion Week and they're in the front row and everyone's making a big deal and you're like, they're just a DJ. I've never heard of them, but everyone's going nuts.
And now I think with the advent of YouTube and like TikTok and Instagram, social media in general, I do think we have like a whole other section of celebrities. We had to draw a line because I'm 49. My brain cannot hold everything. I need to keep gossip from the 80s in here, and I can't pick up TikTok stars. I just can't. But there are whole groups of other people who like the TikTok stars are their celebrities, and they're like, I don't know who that person is. And I'll be like, how do you not know who Kathy Bates is or whatever? I think it's become really like fragmented in a way that is kind of hard to like, I'm sure it's harder for someone like People Magazine. Like, who are they supposed to cover? Who cares about who?
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Heather Cox.
And I'm Jessica Morgan. We are the Fud Girls.
This is a dream come true for me. I am so excited. You were a chapter in my dissertation, which I finished in 2011, but you are foundational to, I think, so much of contemporary gossip, the way that it has been formed, the way that it operates today. Like, this is like, there's no one else that I would rather have this conversation with. So
we jokingly call ourselves the grandmothers of
I know
the internet.
We used to joke that we were going to have to like transition into being the Fug Hags instead of the Fug Girls. I think that time is now. Like, I'm going to be 50 next year. I don't know if I'm a girl anymore. Fug Woman sounds kind of like uptight.
I think Fug Hag is pretty catchy.
Yeah.
Like, do you know the magazine Closer? Do you know that magazine?
Of course.
Yeah. So Closer has morphed into a magazine, a gossip magazine that is very interested in the lives of women of a certain age who are still part of like the larger celebrity world. And when I see Closer in the grocery store, I'm like, yeah, there is always going to be an appetite for gossip about the stars that I have always found interesting.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me, I think I saw this in the market the other day, and it was like, this might be wrong because I can't remember if the person I'm about to name is alive, but I think it was something like Lonnie Anderson Secrets. And I was like, oh, like people still care about Lonnie Anderson.
I was just about to say that like Closer is to us as when I would go through the grocery line in like the 90s, it was the Bert and Lonnie gossip. Yeah. And I was like, who's the market for this? I am now the market for that.
I know, right? Except for, and this is, and I think a lot of listeners can relate to this, when everything happened with Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, a younger generation, like they were like, what are you guys getting so worked up about?
You guys, this is foundational. This is foundational. Learn your gossip history. Come on. It's not even that far back.
And I will say that there's so much joy to be found in rediscovering gossip history. So like my work and a lot of like my previous work especially was thinking about like, oh my gosh, can you imagine what it was like when this happened with Elizabeth Taylor or when this happened with Ingrid Bergman, right? Like that sort of thing.
During COVID at one point, we put up a piece, and I cannot remember what the impetus was. I think it was that we were looking for archival pictures of outfits, and I found one of Julia Roberts with Kiefer. Oh, and we did a piece about their whole situation. And I I found an old People magazine article about like the wedding and the lead up to the wedding, the break, and it was fascinating because it was full of all these weird, juicy details that I feel like you would never get now because it was so, I don't want to say impartial because it's not that people, but like it just felt like someone actually reported it out.
People used to be a lot bitchier.
Yeah.
Like a lot bitchier.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot bitchier. Also, there just wasn't the same sort of control, and Julia Roberts like played that whole situation like she wasn't a star. She played it like she was just like her character in Runaway Bride, you know,
and there
which
were
was
like
always
details about weird, like Kiefer's request for the wedding cake was really weird. Like there were all these really great little nuggets in there, and I was like, boy, they don't make them like they used to. Like that was a really good moment of this is why we bought People in the grocery store, because we wanted to know what Kiefer Sutherland wanted the wedding cake to be.
If I'm remembering correctly, the entire wedding was also like the theme was like kind of Steel Magnolias. Like it was a Southern theme in some capacity. I might be misremembering.
No, you're right.
This, Melody.
I reread this recently.
Gonna fact check me. Yes.
It was sort of like, I think they were doing it on the lot. Like on the movie lot?
Yes, on a movie lot. Yes.
It was like, I remember when this happened, I was in high school, and it was one of those things that broke through where you would like go to school and people would be like, oh my God, did you hear what happened? Because like this is before the internet. So we weren't like on Twitter being like, or whatever, X, Instagram, I don't know. Like gossiping about it. You had to wait till you got to school and be like, oh my God, I heard the craziest thing on Entertainment Tonight this weekend.
And like the Youngs all missed out on Bennifer 1.0. Like it was a big deal when they called their wedding off, like on the doorstep of the event. And it was, and just with the Jenny from the Block video and the movies and the lead up to all of that, and then it just coming crashing down was and I remember like paparazzi shots from above with helicopters and all that. And you were like, this was a huge deal at the time, like massive deal. Like, and as it would be now, imagine if someone, I don't know who's getting married right now. I apologize. But if someone were, I would imagine if they called it off 2 days before their wedding, it would be a big stonking deal.
Who is getting married right now?
I mean, the only person I can think of is already married, and it wouldn't be someone anyone would care about. Who's getting married? I was going to say Saoirse Ronan, and I was like, she's married, and also like she's. No, that might not be. That maybe wouldn't feed the gossip piece in quite the same way.
Wait, this is a good tee up for
Taylor and Travis. If they got married and they called it off 2 days beforehand,
oh my God,
Earth would fall out of orbit, and that's kind of like what this was, I think.
Yes.
So,
and no one is as interested in Julia Roberts today as I think we should be as interested. Like the power of her star.
Oh my God,
is so incredible. And if you don't have that memory of early '90s Julia Roberts, it's really difficult to attribute that to her. Do you know what I mean? Like you just don't have that balance.
And just like the mess, the openness of the mess.
Yes. The other thing that I would add that you were gesturing towards is reality stars. And I think like there were the version of reality stars historically, and some of them were just, real life people who became celebritized for various reasons. Mm-hmm. But what we see now with the many, many seasons of reality television and then the spinoffs is that they become their own like narrative universe.
Oh, totally.
And so if someone becomes invested in them, there's like a whole gossip arc that you can follow on them. And I see this in People magazine, like a lot of gossip about like what's happening in Sister Wives, right? Mm-hmm. Which
the Housewives, it's a whole ecosystem.
And then if you're invested in that ecosystem, the same way that someone would be invested in, I don't know, classic Hollywood stars, like it seems just as interesting and salacious, even more so because the big stars are so tapped down, right?
And I do think the reality TV of it all it gave you that illusion of a window into who somebody really was. Yes. Thinking back to prehistory when, Jessica Simpson was just a singer. Nobody really cared that much about her. Apologies, Jessica. But when she got her reality show and it was Newlyweds and it was the Chicken of the Sea stuff and everything, like suddenly she was going to be in movies and suddenly she was mega famous, or even the Osbournes. Yeah. Other than in a nostalgia way where people were like Ozzy Osbourne, rock music, like nobody cared about Kelly and Jack and Sharon. And now Sharon's like a talk show host, and Kelly, I don't even know what she's doing anymore, but she was on E! For a long time. Like, I think I don't know if it's that you have to like double barrel it where you're like, we did this one thing, but then now I'm a hyphenate. And so that puts me up the ladder. But the reality of it all, I think, made you feel like you were getting to know that person. And I think that's just sort of sprayed outward. And now you have literally the Bravo cinematic universe where there's 45 different iterations of cliques that are all interwoven and famous, and now you have traders where you get like people from other reality shows coming together on that show. But just like the number of celebrities feels like it's multiplied because TV has multiplied. And I think TV being that, like, I think TV's done a lot of it. I do, as much because movies still feel like they have that slight exclusivity to them.
Totally.
And TV has just proliferated in a way that it's impossible to keep track of. And that's worked for documentary and reality as well.
So the entire idea for this episode, I mean, I could have done this episode. I could do it every week. I could do this episode, but it came out of the comments section for our Ben Affleck episode a couple months ago. And a listener named Karen wrote that in the 2024 world devoid of live TV and gossip magazines, how do you keep up with A, who is a celebrity, and B, all of the tea about them? So that's going to be kind of the guiding question, is like, where does this information come from? How has that changed? All that sort of thing. But I do think that first, I think I would love to revisit, and I know our listeners would love to visit, how you got started. So how did Go Fog Yourself get started?
I'm sure we got started gossiping just like anybody else. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Which is a lovely, Jessica and I had been friends for a while. We'd both been, we'd met because we were both recapping for the OG recapping site, Television Without Pity,
right,
which was called Mighty Big TV back in those days. And then I moved to Los Angeles and didn't know anybody, but I knew she had lived there and we'd interacted on the forums. So like any responsible early 20 something, I decided to meet the person I knew only from the internet. But I was like, you know what? I've read her writing. I feel like I know her. We've talked to each other on the message boards. Like, I trust this. This is going to be fine. I was right.
Yeah.
So we became friends. It did work out. We're still friends. But she did not kill me. She wore a really cute coat though.
Not yet. It's a long con, Heather.
That's right.
Really long.
So we became friends. Our friendship groups became friends. Like a lifelong love affair was born. But so I remember there was one day we were walking around the mall and,
remember malls? First of all, like that's how you know how old we are.
Was it an indoor mall or an outdoor?
It was the Beverly Center. Yes. We were like half shopping, half window shopping, 100% drinking ice blendeds from the coffee bean. And just all the posters that were around us advertising any project anywhere were all hideous. And like the styling was terrible. Someone's eye was this way and one was the other. Like they were cross-eyed, or cockeyed or whatever. It was very, and we were like, what is this for? Like who is looking at this and being like, yes, I need to engage with this movie. And we sort of laughed it off. And then sort of that discussion turned into, you look through Us Weekly and you're like, what the hell? What is this? What is this outfit? What is, and suddenly we felt like, well, maybe this is something that we can just like laugh it off on the internet, because at the time everybody was making blogs for stuff. It was, for a while it was Angelina Jolie's leg comes out. It has its own Twitter account. Before that, people wanted to do something funny on the internet. They'd make a comedy blog, and people were bored at work, needed to blow off steam.
There was no social media,
no.
There was no social media. You just reloaded the blog.
Reloaded the blog, and so we were like, let's blow off some steam on the internet, making fun of like all of these hideous choices people are making, and trying to understand like, what are you thinking? And like, wouldn't you, if it were me, wouldn't I not have worn whatever you have done here that is made out of like strings? And taking that sort of every person attitude, like the discussions you have with your friends when you're watching the Oscars, but like putting it on the internet. And so that was how we got started.
Okay, we have so much to get to, so let's hear our first question, which comes from Sarah.
Thug Girls reader since 2005. Do people younger than millennials even care about celebrity gossip and fashion the way those of us raised on the Joan Rivers red carpet and award show life do? How is celebrity fashion changing with social media platforms versus award shows and premieres as the main way to be a public figure?
I mean, I think the reach of social media, I think, has affected everything. It's impossible not to use that as a touchstone. But I also think that some of social media and the rise of styling has kind of come hand in hand. I think with now that you're everywhere and you can be in so many different places at once and you get so much different levels of exposure and, the algorithm can show you to people and like all of that, that I think people are styling themselves more consciously or rigorously, perhaps,
Yes.
whether it's to go viral or not. But I think there's that level in there that, like, I think that's changed the way that people present themselves, sometimes for better or for worse. Whereas before, if you wanted to see what Lara Flynn Boyle was wearing, you had to watch the Golden Globes or whatever it was that she wore the ballerina dress to. I can't remember which one it was. You had to turn on those red carpets, and you don't really have to do that anymore. So I don't know that I think the younger readers really do care so much about award shows or about watching E. Like, I'm very curious as to what the demographics look like of who actually tunes in for Live on the Red Carpet. And if it's like our website demographic, which I think is probably never going to get any younger. Like, I think it's just like, you were with us when we started and we're moving together. I just don't know that because they can get it everywhere else, and you can get it, if you want it uncritically, you can get it here. If you want it critically, you can get it here. But like, you don't need to turn on the TV and like be like, who are they wearing?
Yeah. Jessica, do you have any thoughts about that?
I feel like the beginning of the question was asking where people who are younger than millennials are getting their celebrities. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did I get that?
Well, are they even interested in celebrity gossip and fashion? And I think they are.
I think so. I don't know if they're interested in getting it from gofugyourself.com, as Heather pointed out, but I definitely think they're interested in seeing it on TikTok. There's a ton of TikToks of like, I decided against TikTok for myself, so I don't have TikTok. As the joke goes, I see TikToks when they make their way to Instagram, like every 40-year-old person.
Yes.
Anyway, but there's a ton of TikToks of like celebrity outfits in the background and like a little talking head being like, look at this dumb outfit.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, that's like what we used to do. It's just on a different medium. So I definitely think that younger people I think people of all ages will always be interested in what other people are wearing. People cared in the 1800s, like what Mary Todd Lincoln was wearing. I'm making this up, but I'm sure that's true.
Yes.
And like, if you learn anything from watching the Gilded Age, people cared what quote unquote society people who were celebrities at the time were wearing to the opera or what have you. So like, people have cared throughout known history about what famous people are wearing and will forever, is my opinion.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of just like the influx of blogs writ even larger, where instead of waiting to see what a certain person thinks about what people are wearing, you're just saying it yourself on your TikTok.
Yeah.
So it's like you care just as much, but you're actively doing the caring and not just being like, ooh, I want to go to, what does Joan Rivers say? Or, what does Mr. Blackwell think? And, to go real deep into the archives.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I do think that it encourages viewers to develop more of their own take, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember I never would like make an opinion about Oscars dresses until I had like seen what different people had said, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of it, one thing I noticed was like when we started doing the website, and like my mom's friends, to be supportive, would start reading the website and they would kind of get sucked into it. And then sometimes I'd get an email from one or two of them that was like something not entirely positive about what somebody had worn. And you could sort of see that there was a little bit of glee there, being like, ooh, I'm engaging in this like almost illicit feeling gossipy activity of being like, she looked crazy. I think now that person would just, well, maybe not that person, but most people would, they go on TikTok and they flip the camera around and they've got a picture behind them and they're like, what the hell? And you just sort of, you can vent it however you want. You don't have to passively engage. You just say it.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, why we became popular in the first place, is because we were actively saying it. And at that time, I think other people who were like, they were like, oh, finally a place to say it, because there weren't all these other places to say it yet. Yeah.
And also you were quote unquote normal people.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I think there's an element of like, yes, we're not coming out here being like, well, if you understood the references to the 1993 Alexander McQueen runway show, you would know that this is a deeply cerebral approach to fashion. Like, no, it's their pants made of duct tape or whatever. Like, it's like, let's not try to overthink this. And I think that cutting through the BS was a big part of it.
Our next question is from Jamie, and it's about the landscape of celebrity gossip. Oh, this is like perfect question.
Celebrity gossip has changed drastically from its 1990s/2000s heyday. How do we critically assess gossip news sources in the age of Deuxmoi and Reddit? When does chatter have meat? How can we suss out the publicist type quote unquote sources from the real deals?
I was just going to say that I think all of your listener questions are like extremely good and thought provoking. I was going to compliment everybody.
I was getting here. I am. I'm like, actually, the 1950s were a much more interesting gossip period.
I think that's true. As I think gossip has been interesting for all time. But I agree with you. I mean, like,
yes,
never forget when Ingrid Bergman got called. No, it wasn't Ingrid Bergman. It was Elizabeth Taylor.
Instrument of evil.
An instrument of evil, and Elizabeth Taylor was chastised for erotic vagrancy. Like, that's crazy. Okay, I have thoughts about Deuxmoi. I have stated them many times. First of all, I obviously follow Deuxmoi and am very interested in what happens on Deuxmoi. Simultaneously, I don't think you can believe anything that you read on Deuxmoi. And I also think Deuxmoi is going to get sued eventually. You heard it here. I know she has a disclaimer that she just publishes anything, but eventually I do think that's going to bite her in the ass. I'm putting that out there. I find Deuxmoi to have such like an interesting duality, no pun intended, wherein I read it, I'm really interested in it. I read the subreddit devoted to it religiously, but I think you have to take stuff on there with like such a grain of salt. For me, I think it has meat as in all journalism, you have multiple sources. Like, you can't just believe Deuxmoi being like, I saw Kaya Gerber like slap Austin Butler at wherever the kids are going now, Catch or whatever. Like, if it's in Deuxmoi and it's in Page Six, and then if it like trickles into People, then like shit's real. But you can't take one source ever for this stuff.
What are both of your relationships to blinds? Because I think a lot of how you think about gossip has to do with what do you like. Are blinds interesting?
Yes.
And
they're interesting. Fun. Yes, they're fun to discuss. They're great mysteries. I think for me, like, the trick with figuring out whether there's meat to any gossip is that ultimately you are never going to know. You just aren't. It's gossip.
Well, unless it comes true. Unless they're like, Ben and Jen are getting divorced and then they get divorced.
Yeah. But like at the time, you really just have to run everything through your own bullshit radar. And your bullshit radar is going to be influenced a little bit based on whatever you kind of want to be true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we say all the time where we're like, I hope Ben and Jen are getting back together because like that would be a great story, like, or whatever. Like you might seek sources, whether you know you're doing it or not, same as you would with the news. You're going to look for something that confirms your bias, and you're going to be more likely to believe that. And the magazines where you have like anytime a celebrity breaks up, you find that like one of them gets People and one of them gets Us Weekly. And you just have to decide, you just have to know that. And you have to know that those publications are often being used in opposition to one another. And those now, unfortunately, are the PR mouthpieces. Doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't true. But those stories aren't there by accident, at least for sure, in my opinion, and People magazine for sure. I think that's one that people use very strategically. If there's an exclusive story on People about Taylor Swift's dad really liking Maddie Healy, I feel like that's been placed there by somebody for a reason because people think of People as the authority. But honestly, I think you have to just kind of, can I be totally honest? And then I think half the time, the most accurate gossip speculation is on Reddit. And I know that's insane.
No, that's true.
It's because all of those people, like I remember watching The Bachelorette this summer and I was in the Bachelorette Reddit while the season was still airing, before anything had happened. All of those people had noticed the ultimate winner's weird social media likes. They had noticed his changes in his social media behavior. And they were on top of all of it and had pretty much cracked the case. And that's where I'm like, internet detectives are ruthless. And regardless of whether I think that's a healthy use of your time, sometimes I will be like, wow, those people are noticing people's, like, what they think are their hidden behaviors. And so I often take that into account a little bit. But at the end of the day, like, you're going to choose what you believe based on kind of what you want to be true. And as long as you are acknowledging that to yourself, I think that's the key, is being like, well, I secretly am rooting for J-Lo. And so I want to believe that, Ben Affleck is a massive pain in the ass. But I'm admitting that that's where I'm coming from. You know what I mean?
I mean, he's a massive pain in the ass. Let's be real, right?
Yeah. I keep thinking of that photo of Matt Damon and Jennifer Lopez talking and like just like exactly what they were talking about. I think, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, like, you have to figure out where is your pleasure center when it comes to gossip,
Mhm.
right? Do you like puzzles? Does that give you pleasure to like try to figure things out? And can you try to figure things out with the understanding that there's no truth, there's no ultimate truth. You're never like, you don't know these people. You're going to find something that you feel is going to be truth. And maybe that's like the part of consuming gossip that's really interesting to you.
Yeah.
Is the rabbit hole.
And I think
right?
I think sometimes the blind items feel as though they are written already aware of what people do or don't want to be true. And so that's when you start to think, well, you're just writing this because like that's what half of Reddit is already talking about. And like you're trying to be an authority. And like, and I think plenty of other gossip websites that specialize in blind items do that, where it just feels like I'm reading something that like you are just making up because it sounds plausible. But it's funny because I remember I used to be, you know, back in 1999 or 2000 or whatever, when Ted Casablanca was writing The Awful Truth and he had a blind item section every couple pages. That was the stuff I looked forward to the most because it was, I'm not saying he invented the blind item, but because the internet was just becoming widespread at that time, he was one of the first, I think, to make them widely accessible. And because he was backed by a publication, you sort of thought, well, he's got legs to stand on. Like he's a real journalist. And like, well, and apologies to Ted, maybe he is, but like, it never really, at that time in my young life, it probably wouldn't have occurred to me to be like, is he just like sitting at home making up stories about Toothy Tile? Or is that like a real situation? And what is Jake Gyllenhaal doing?
Poor Jake.
Toothy Tile?
I feel like Jake Gyllenhaal's like, God damn it, Ted Casablanca.
Right? Somewhere in Jake Gyllenhaal's house, he has a holiday ornament that says Merry Christmas Toothy Tile on it or something. Like, somebody has clearly bought him some merch. But I think that sort of spoiled us a little, and it made the blind item put it in the lexicon. And then after that, I think people just sort of thought, well, they all must have some grounding, and where there's smoke, there's fire. And I'm like, with a blind item, I tend to think, especially the ones that aren't really blind, where they're like, Snake Snively is making a movie, and her husband Brian Reynolds is a jerk. Or like, you're like, okay, that's someone just wrote that on their Microsoft Word and emailed it, like.
Well, and so much like the if you go back and look at old school blind items, like in the 1950s and that sort of thing, like so much of it was about behavior that was actually incredibly socially illicit. So whether that was dating someone of another race or being gay, like there's just like they had to have, there was a language that you were speaking to other people who knew. Right? Yeah. And now it's more like, what do people want to believe?
Well, I feel like also now, half of the ones on Deuxmoi, I'm like, a publicist sent this in. Like,
totally.
PR lady who wrote this, God bless your heart, you need to learn to write like a random who just spotted these two people and not like a PR person who's writing a press release. Because some of them will be like, spotted canoodling like this hot person and this hot person at this hot restaurant. I'm like, okay. Like
or like, which B-list actress who you love just landed the role of her career on the hottest new show.
Yes.
She beat out everyone you could possibly imagine. And you're like, okay, well, thanks, HBO PR. Like,
so funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next question is about which stories gain traction. This comes from Amanda, and Melody's going to read it.
What causes some high-profile celebrity gossip to break into the mainstream consciousness, J-Lo and Ben's divorce maybe, while other stories seem to stay among those who are, quote, extremely online and never hit the mainstream? For example, Brad Pitt is still beloved by many, even though the plane incident, where he allegedly abused his ex-wife and at least one child, is well documented but never hit the mainstream.
All right. So is the answer Brad Pitt's publicist?
Yes.
Or is there something more complex?
Well, we talked about this on Go Fuck Yourself last week.
Yeah.
And someone was like, why hasn't Brad Pitt been canceled? And my answer was multifold. And it was like, hardly anybody gets canceled. Like Harvey Weinstein.
Not real.
Other than that.
Mel Gibson isn't even canceled.
Yeah.
Like, Spacey is barely even canceled. He's like working somewhere now. Like, no one gets canceled, guys. Calm down.
Ellen DeGeneres has a new Netflix special about how sad she was canceled. Like, I'm like, you're on Netflix. You're not that canceled. Regardless. Yeah. But the thing about Brad, I think, is he is a handsome white man with a ton of money who can pay for the best PR team in town. He's one of the only real movie stars left
Yeah.
So people are attached to him. And I also think so many people are just not paying that much attention. Like, they're just not. Like, I think people who are listening to this are paying attention. But I think you would be surprised by how many people, like, just don't pay that much attention to stuff. Like, I remember having a conversation with someone a while ago, and they didn't know about the rumors that John Travolta was gay. And I was like, everybody knows that. And they were like, really?
No, this happens in my life all the time, too.
Of course. And in a sense, I'm like, that's good. Like, people should not be this tuned into maybe what celebrities are doing in their personal life. I honestly think with Brad, it's money. People magazine is not going to go against Brad Pitt.
Or George Clooney.
Yeah. Or
And
Clooney.
Brad has powerful friends that I think Angelina doesn't really have. And so, yeah, you get Brad Pitt and George Clooney in a movie together, and it's like, look, the bros are back together.
Right.
Isn't this great? And it's such an easy PR sell.
I do think the worm is turning a little bit on Brad. I don't think it's going to turn entirely. And some of it, I think, is because he's getting, like all of us, older. And he's wearing like a lot of bucket hats. He's dating a much younger woman. And I think that stuff sort of activates people's spidey sense a little bit about a person.
It's the bucket hats, you guys.
It's the bucket hats on a
Beware.
60-year-old man. There's like something going on here.
It's a clue. Yes, I agree with you.
That he's having a bit of a midlife crisis or whatever. I do think people maybe are getting weird vibes off Brad Pitt, but I don't know that they've absorbed the actual bad vibes from Brad Pitt.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, I think there's an element of like, if they don't, and also like, you can read, like, yes, you can read the report about everything that happened from the investigation, but I think there's still people who will be like, but it happened on the plane, we didn't see it, you don't know.
Well, people don't
it's
want to
like,
believe
well,
a woman. Just
no.
they don't.
Well,
and
that was
also
my
there
next
is
point. I
still-
think it's misogynistic a little
of
bit.
course.
Because when you looked at J-Lo and Ben's divorce, this has been my high horse that I've been on lately, but like you look at their divorce, and immediately when that's all, the rush of press when that split up was people being like, we knew it. She's deranged. She's obsessed with marriage. She can't keep a man. She's annoying.
Yep.
She's too freaky about wanting publicity. And it's like, really? Like, we're really... And I think because that story confirmed what I think a lot of people who secretly or unsecretly hate J-Lo wanted to believe. They were like, oh, yeah. I think that worm has slightly started turning. And lo and behold, as soon as people started leaking stories that like maybe Ben is sort of a dark and twisty, moody pain in the ass... And also, by the way, he was not opposed to using the paparazzi to promote his relationship with Ana de Armas during COVID. So, like, why would he suddenly hate it with J-Lo? Like, he knew what he was getting into. He's not a poor, impressionable little lamb from the sticks. Like,
yeah, it's been freaking Affleck, you guys. He's not like a sad orphan child she picked up on the side of the road.
Right. And as soon as people started saying a little bit more of that, suddenly we've got these stories that are like, well, they're canoodling at the polo bar with their kids. And it's like, oh, okay, so now you're making her, and people are flinging back to like, she just needs to go away for a while. She doesn't know what she's doing. So I really think, unfortunately, the idea that the desire to like, it's all like, this is the woman humble enough? This idea of tearing down the woman, I think, is much more appealing to people still.
And also, I think discounts just how complicated Angelina Jolie's image is and like her resonance in most people's minds. Like, even though she very successly renovated her image, she still is like the Black Widow, right?
Of
Like,
course.
she's still,
She kissed her brother
like,
and she wore blood.
Yeah, like she still has this like, she's a chameleon, and like, oh, they broke up, and like maybe she's in a relationship with a woman, and like, oh, all the kids are on her side. And I think you have a lot of like divorced dad energy that's like, well, she's just like, all the kids want to be, you know, hanging out with her, like something's going on. And so I think it's like she has also used her very subtle PR strategy in a way that maybe hasn't worked in her favor.
I don't think so.
You know what I mean?
Well, the other thing is that like, I do think there's still a hangover from the whole Brad, Jennifer, Angelina love triangle of our lifetime, where people, you still see it online sometimes, where people are like still mad at Angelina Jolie for quote unquote stealing Ben from Jennifer Aniston. You guys, it was 20 years ago.
But that's never going to go
No.
away. That is always going to be part of the way that she signifies, the same way that it was always part of who Elizabeth Taylor was, is that she, you know, stole Bobby Fischer from poor Debbie Reynolds.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. This is something I think about all the time. And it's about how so much of what we know is now coming from the celebrities themselves. This comes from Lexi.
What's the deal with celebrity interviews these days? Seems like it involves chicken, like Hot Ones or Chicken Shop Date, or like showing their house in a very staged manner, a la Open Door AD. These feel very staged and PR-y, but I do love them a lot. Is this a result of the journalism industry declining, celebrities deciding how they want to be in the world, or just YouTube making things fun and interesting rather than relying on legacy media?
I think it's a cocktail of a lot of those things because I think there's this desire to be viral. And if you're going to become a meme, you want it to be for something fun or funny, or you want to be like here's every reaction of Jennifer Lawrence eating hot wings, and you want it to be increasingly hilarious, And like I think celebrities see that as an opportunity to let you feel like you're getting a piece of them, even if maybe you're not. Right. When you look at legacy media, and this is something that we would run into on the occasions that we would freelance, there was a resistance to saying anything about some celebrities if they were like, well, they were just on our cover, or like, well, her people are going to be really mad if you put that, or whatever. And and you think, well, but you hired us to be opinion writers, so like we don't want to like lie about our opinion on something just because you are afraid of how like Lindsay Lohan's going to react. Like, I don't want to say that I like her dress just because you want her on the cover in 2 months. So there was a bit of that where these legacy publications that are sort of struggling need to preserve access. And I think that's why you get a lot of really fawning celebrity profiles that aren't you read it and you're like, I'm not going to read anything in here that they're not going to challenge them on anything. Occasionally they do when you get a celebrity who I think understands that what they need to be challenged on is something they need to address. But for the most part, they're not. And I think you can get away with that if you're Taffy Ackner and you're writing for the New York Times and you are a genius at what you do and you have that platform. But otherwise, you're not going to see a lot of that. So when you get like the hot ones, it feels like it's something different, more honest. And in the end it is, because with hot wings, Chicken Shop Date I don't really get. I feel like it's weird vibes, and really I've never seen a clip from that wasn't sort of short and brusque and unfulfilling. Like I don't get it. So that one I have to leave aside because I don't think it's as useful to celebrities as maybe people think it is. But Hot Ones, that guy asks really good questions. And even if the celebrities are given the questions in advance and given all the time in the world to prepare, the one thing they cannot control is how they're going to react to the hot wing. And so that gives you this sort of illusion of spontaneity, and it can kind of throw a curveball. And I think that's what makes that such a pleasure to watch, and makes it feel like a more useful PR thing. Because you're like, oh, I'm experiencing this moment with Hugh Jackman right now. I can see steam coming out of his collar. Like we're having this thing together, and it's no one's controlling it. He absolutely has no control over what his body's doing right now. And it feels more honest than what you're seeing anywhere else.
It's also just sort of like Hot Ones is such a silly idea. And I think it's just kind of like so simple. We're going to make a celebrity eat a hot wing. It's just sort of fun. Like I think a celebrity is going on that because I think it's going to be fun. And I do think when they are like, I think if you're you're doing like a press junket or whatever, it's like you're seeing 400 different journalists and they're all like, what was it like to work with Chris Evans or whatever the same question is. And like, that is not a shade to a journalist. I have been that person at Fashion Week asking the same question that the person has heard 100 times. It is a hard job. We all have to ask the same questions. But I think going on, I'm sure that gets kind of like monotonous. So to go on Hot Ones is not monotonous. And I think it is fun. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're getting that. I think they just flat out want to do it.
That's true. Yeah. And some of the other ones is the illusion of access. I haven't seen Open Door AD, but I would imagine
it's kind of like, I would describe it
Cribs.
As, that's not where I was going to go. I wish.
I was hoping.
I was going to say it's like Vogue's 76 questions, but better.
Yes.
Okay.
It's less cheesy than 76 questions, which I feel like really needs someone to go in there and kind of like shake it up a little bit because it's so like controlled and scripted feeling. AD Open Door is a lot better. Especially if you're nosy about people's houses, which I am.
Which I think is great. Like these are all how they really live is the kind of stuff that I think really appeals to people, and not so much like she showed up to the cafe in simple black leggings and a gray sweatshirt, not a speck of makeup on her face. She ate a salad. And you're like, well, that's, I mean, or, you know, she ate her whole grilled cheese sandwich. I don't care about that stuff. And I think that's where the legacy media profiles do start to feel a little less fresh. And you're sort of like, or I could watch Melissa McCarthy spray milk into her mouth after she's eaten a wing of death. Or the really good one was where they had Aubrey Plaza ask Patti LuPone either apologize to Madonna or eat a wing of death, and she just like shoveled the wings of death in her mouth. And I was like, that was worth its weight in whatever discomfort she had later.
Yeah, and I think it functions in some ways the way that Instagram and Twitter worked really early on, right?
Yeah.
Or even like that you're like, oh my gosh, Ashton Kutcher took a picture of Demi Moore's butt, right? Like that was one of the famous first like uses of a twit pic was what it was called,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And you're like, oh, and he even said, like Ashton Kutcher said, like we're taking the paparazzi back into our own hands. And what he meant by that is essentially like, oh, you're hungry for authenticity and you feel like you want to have something authentic, like, here, I'll give it to you, but I'm going to be in control of it.
I feel like the other side of that is my true belief that most celebrities should not be in charge of their social media at all. Like,
totally.
You should not be. But yeah, there was a real wild, wild west happening there with Twitter for a while.
And now there's this interesting, I think, disconnect where they say, like, we are the author of our own Instagram. Like, I don't know, Daisy Edgar Jones, like, oh, she posts to her own Instagram. But I think she has a team that also is like, okay, let's pick this photo, and this photo.
Yeah. Daisy Edgar Jones is, no offense to Daisy Edgar Jones, as an actress, I like her. As a celebrity, she's very boring. Like, she's not going to be.
The only thing interesting is that she hangs out with Paul Mescal sometimes. Yeah. Like, that's the only, that's the reason I follow her, to see those
pictures. Bless her heart, and I think it's good for her as a human person, but she's not going to be posting anything totally out of pocket on her Instagram. Do you know what I mean? So, okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, even now, like, that stuff's becoming more curated. Like, I remember when everyone first started following Busy Phillips really earnestly, it was because she would hang out with Michelle Williams on Instagram, and it was like a totally different side of Michelle Williams that you would occasionally get to see. And then her Instagram following kind of blew up, and I feel like that doesn't happen anymore. Like, Michelle Williams is not on there anymore, and it's very different. So it's almost like it's becoming as carefully managed in some ways as anything else.
For sure.
It's this illusion of getting the straight scoop.
The only other thing I'd say before we do our last question is that I think younger audiences in particular, and I'm not trying to be like derogatory, but like they just don't read as much. So they're not going to read a celebrity profile. They might read parts of it aggregated, but they will watch YouTubes in a way that is very difficult for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm actually criticizing myself that like it is hard for me to sit down and watch a 4-minute YouTube video.
I don't want to do that. And I don't want to ask anyone to do that. No one wants to watch me on a 4-minute YouTube video. No. Like, my God. No. We resist video on the blog all the time. And I'm sure that's outmoded, but I'm like, we run a website. People read on the sly at work. Like,
exactly.
Like, don't want to do video. Like, I'm sorry.
We do not want your boss to walk in your office and hear my voice being like, this woman looks like an idiot. Like, it's not professional.
Yeah. Like, what's up with the drawstring pants, Brad? Like, that's, yeah.
For our last question, we're going to actually do this as an Ask Ann Anything, but keep it on theme. This is about how to spot a PR move and how to avoid falling into a conspiracy theory rabbit hole. This question comes from Johanna.
With social media and accounts analyzing PR moves, have we, as consumers of celebrity gossip, also become more critical of celebrities' motives and better at spotting PR strategies? Or are we just more likely to buy into conspiracy theories? Why do we think everything is PR rather than a genuine fuck-up or relationship?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's a great question.
I know.
I sometimes think a pendulum swings in either extreme. Like, either there are people who will believe everything they read. Like, we would get emails from people, or not emails, but just back in the day, we'd get a comment on a post that was like, but I thought Kate Middleton was pregnant with twins. And it was someone who like meant it because they'd seen it on Closer magazine at the supermarket, and they just like, but it says it on the magazine. And then you get the people who are like, everything's a lie. And there's not as much middle ground as there should be. Or maybe that's just because the loudest factions are always the ones that are making the most, they're the loudest. I don't know what to say to that one. I think some of it is like, I used to talk about this with reality TV where like, cause we both used to work in reality TV. And sometimes you would get after like a season or 2 or 3 of a show, you'd get people who were cast on the show and they would come on because they wanted to be there, but they also kind of wanted to beat the show at what they perceived as its own game.
Yes.
So they'd be like, I'm not going to give them anything. I'm not going to tell them what I think about anything in a real way. I'm just going to be here to learn how to model, and I'm not giving them anything. And those people would never be on the show because they were really boring. So it's like, in fact, you didn't beat the show at its own game. You bought into the wrong thing. Like you've not presented yourself at all in attempting to present yourself in a way that you imagine is better. And so I guess what I mean by that is like, we all think I think we went through a phase where we thought we were smarter than the PR game, where we were like realizing that these machines existed. And we were like, everything I see, I'm smarter than you now. I know, I see the wheels turning. And really, I think the truth has got to be somewhere in the middle.
Well, and like to kind of piggyback off that, we used to get on basically any competition reality show you would work on, or really almost any reality show, you would get people who would be like, the producers have fixed this and like they're manipulating this. And I would be like, I wish I had time to manipulate anything. I do not. We are on a tight schedule. We have no time for anything. Like, I haven't seen the daylight in like 6 weeks. I don't have time to manipulate anything. And I do think some of that is also the case in like the celebrity PR world. Like, of course, people who are very rich and powerful and have a big team are capable of like rolling stuff out. Like Taylor Swift is obviously the queen of this, of having everything like planned out to the very dotting her I's, crossing her T's, everything. But I think a lot of people, they are just kind of like reacting in the moment because they have 100 other things to do. And I'm just pulling this person out thin air. Like, Madeline Klein is not their only client. So as Heather said, the truth is in the middle. Sometimes people just fuck up. Not everything is a conspiracy. And I also think that something we've all learned in the last 20 years is that I don't want to speak for the rest of the world, American media literacy is kind of crummy. And, you know, we would see that with like the example Heather brought up, where I would be like, Closer magazine is never going to break news about Kate Middleton's health, ever. If you have good scoop, you're going to sell it to someone who can pay you for it. You're going to go to the Daily Mail. You're going to go to People. Occasionally, a small magazine like In Touch will break the Duggar case because they are on the reality show beat. That is their bread and butter.
They're sourced up in the reality show world. Yes.
They're not sourced up in the British royal family. Give me a break. And so I do think that like people do need to like read stuff and think about, where am I getting this from? What is my source here? And I think half of the world is getting worse at that and half of the world is getting better at it. So I think we're all meeting kind of in the middle, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and it's hard because I do think that there is a generation, and it's really our generation. I think it's millennials and Gen X who grew up during the gossip blog era and were exposed to people like you, like Lainey, who were writing about, here is how you understand how publicity works in the celebrity world right now, right? Like, okay, if it says a friend or close associate, like that's probably their publicist, right? Or like just kind of gave you these keywords and this means to understand. And what I see now is a lot of like, there's a reason there was so much overlap between QAnon and Crazy Days and Nights, which was a gossip site. Like, and I think this was aided, of course, by everything that happened with Jeffrey Epstein, that you're like, oh, there is this nefarious underworld that lends credence to everything else that I want to believe about QAnon and a conspiracy going on in the United States writ large, not just in the world of celebrity. And so I think there's media literacy. I think there's a lack of trust.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Of
and just
course.
this idea of like, I don't want to be hoodwinked, and you become so cynical that you think everything is a ploy. And that's the pendulum swinging too far in the other direction.
Yes.
You know, like I think, and also, and I say this all the time about like government conspiracies and stuff. Like, I'm sorry, our government can barely agree on whether to pay itself. They are not pulling off massive global conspiracies on the level that the whack jobs think they are. And I think I find it to be sort of similar with celebrities. Like, I appreciate Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell being like, yeah, you know what? We were pretending to cozy up in pictures to promote our movie.
Yes. Yes.
But like, that to me is so much more realistic. Like, they went to some premieres. Maybe they had like cozied up on Instagram in a couple posts, but like over like a short span of time. And then it was over. And then they copped to it later. And they were like, yeah, of course that was a marketing strategy. But like the ones where it's like, you know, Priyanka Chopra and Nick Jonas are bearding each other. And I'm like, at this point, like, do we really think they've been bearding each other for years? Like, you may not think that makes sense, but like, and maybe who knows what's really going on there. But like, I find that it's hard to imagine that anything that would be that much of a PR machine situation for that long wouldn't have already had cracks in the, you know, like stuff would be leaking about it. Like I just think it's really hard to pull off anything like that, harder than anyone thinks.
I also think that
yes, especially now,
it's just, you guys, sometimes it's just two hot people want to have sex. That's normal. Like, not everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes people just want to get it on. Maybe they're co-stars. It's not going to last forever. Like, not everything is made up for press. You have to kind of use your own, like, does it pass the personal sniff test? And I do think people are kind of getting better at that. Like, for sure, you'll see stuff, again, to bring up Deuxmoi, where you'll see people on the subreddit devoted to Deuxmoi, feuds, be like, nice try. This was clearly a PR. And I was like, you're right. That was a PR plant. Like, so I think people who consume it a lot can maybe teach themselves to be appropriately critical consumers of gossip.
Yeah.
I think people who get it, I mean, I don't know. There's all like, I feel like I didn't really have a point there, because there are then people who get sucked into like a full conspiracy theory and spend all their time like making a murder board about it when like there's no murder board.
At the end of the day, you will read the stuff. You can know anything you want to, like, you're going to have to decide for yourself if you think People Magazine is full of shit. You're going to have to decide for yourself if you think there's a ring of truth to the Deuxmoi post, to the Reddit theories, to the whatever. But always you have to bring that level of self-awareness into it, to be like, I am sort of making the choice because this is what I want to
like, I enjoy this.
And I
enjoy this idea. Well, and I also do think, so every now and then you will come across a post on like Reddit or a blog or Twitter, whatever, where it's like, what is the conspiracy theory you believe? And reading those is always delightful to me.
Great.
It's always so fun.
Yes.
And you'd be like, oh, wait, the thing that I was just going to say, like, in reading that, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I always had the experience of reading them and being like, oh yeah, I believe that one too. Like, so I think everybody does have a conspiracy theory. I can't think of mine off the top of my head, but for sure
I know mine.
What's yours?
Mine is that somebody said that Jessica Chastain is like the illegitimate daughter of Ron Howard. And that explains her and Bryce Dallas Howard looking so similar, but not quite. And I was like, with apologies to all of their families, I choose to believe that's true.
Oh, I think Ronan Farrow is definitely Frank Sinatra's son.
Here's my thought about that, though. He looks so much like Mia. I think Mia and Frank look like each other. So that throws it off.
Fair.
But yeah.
As long as your conspiracy theories don't manifest in the real world in ways that harm people, I think that
keep
that's
it
the
healthy.
difference.
Keep it to your group text.
That's where gossip really sort of starts to get into something insidious. And like, don't ruin our sport, you guys. Don't take this joy from us.
Be cool. You guys just be cool. Please be cool.
This is a great place for us to end. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. Where can people find more of you on the internet if they want more of your work?
Not
there's
TikTok.
There's multiple spots now, which I think is fantastic.
We have many places. You can find us at our old school web blog talking about celebrity fashion at GoFug, F-U-G with a G, fugyourself.com. We now also have a Substack, which is a hoot, in my personal opinion, where we talk about gossip, celebrity news. We do a lot of recaps, old school TV recap. That's still your jam. It's called Drinks with Broads. It is at Substack. Those are the main areas.
Great comment section.
Yes.
Great comment section.
Delightful. I think, well, I've seen the stats. So you and Drinks with Broads, we have a big Venn diagram overlap in our readership. So I think we can both speak from a place of certainty that the comment sections are excellent, because I think we have a lot of overlap in our commenters.
And otherwise, we're really weak on social media, you guys. We're like everyone else. Twitter's kind of Instagram we never really figured out.
Yeah.
You can find us there, but you're more likely to catch us in writing and not have to like look at our faces or usually listen to our voices.
I love it. Thank you again. Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise that you do not want to miss any of them. One of the episodes in the pipeline is about famous celebrity feuds, past and present. Get your questions in ASAP because this one's going to be great, and it's with Joel Anderson from the Slow Burn podcast and a lot of other places. He is amazing. I cannot wait for this episode. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. Today's episode is free for everyone, so if you like what you hear and if you want to support the show, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, the Ask Ann Anything segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. And if you're a paid subscriber, head over to the discussion thread and keep the discussion going. For today's discussion, what are your feelings about celebrity gossip today? Where are your trusted sources? And what do you think we have and haven't learned from the pinnacle of 2000s gossip, which is at kind of the center of our discussion here? The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.